I think 5 years into the war, it's just about impossible to argue on a sort of cost-benefit analysis that it has been worth it, to use the phrase that some people are using. It's not that there have been no benefits. I think getting rid of Saddam Hussein is obviously a good thing. But when you look at the long list of goals that the country set out to achieve, getting rid of weapons of mass destruction, which it turns out weren't really there, establishing democracy throughout the region. You look at Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the rest of the region today, don't seem to be making progress there. Establishing American power and respect in the Middle East, I think the opposite has happened when you look at our standing in the world and public opinion polls in the Muslim world. Playing as a regional power, you look at this long list of things that we were supposed to get out of this. A major step forward in the war on terror was another selling point. It's hard to argue, indeed it's possible to argue the opposite, that actually this has been a cost in the war on terror because of the way perceived occupation of a major Arab state has provoked terrorism rather than reduced it. So when you look at all of these things that weren't accomplished, then the costs start to be in perspective even more. It would be one thing to look at those costs in terms of nearly 4,000 American lives and hundreds of billions of dollars. We can debate precisely how much, but it probably will end up costing more than $1 trillion, prestige and so on. You could argue that those costs would all be worth it if we had a lot to show for it. But I think for those costs, any fair assessment would want to see more than we have seen 5 years into this. There's no doubt that things over the past year in Iraq have been better than they were for the previous several years. That's encouraging. It suggests that it is just possible that if we can continue to keep security where it is or make it even better, violence coming down, this would, as the surge was designed to do, provide some breathing space for Iraqi leaders to get on with political settlement. I think when we're talking about the surge, it's important to remember, I do think it is clear that the increase in American troops and the new American tactics have made a difference. But I think what they have done is reinforce trends that were going on in Iraq that are at least as important as the surge. The so-called awakening movements where the Sunni tribes have turned against al-Qaeda, which started to happen before the surge was in place, but I think the surge reinforces it, but that's hugely important. And the ceasefire by Muqtada al-Sadr's militia, which also was in place before the surge troops were there, is also important. The problem, of course, is that both of those trends are tenuous and uncertain. How long will these tribes continue to work on our side rather than against us? How long will the ceasefire with the Shia groups hold? So I think the surge has reinforced those two trends. Sadly, another contributing factor to the decline in violence is simply displaced persons. Nearly 1 in 6 Iraqis is no longer living where he or she was at the start of the war. More than 2 million have been displaced outside the country, and more than 2 million have been internally displaced. So neighborhoods are no longer as mixed as they once were, providing less opportunities, if you will, for violence. So that's a sort of tragic way in which violence has come down. But we are where we are, and the issue regarding the surge is it worth a continued American investment in order to, as the surge was sold, give the Iraqi leaders a chance? Well, we know what President Bush thinks, and he's going to continue with this strategy for the 10 more months that he's President of the United States. I think by then we'll have a pretty good sense, an even better sense than now, whether he's right. If violence continues to come down, and it looks like the troops are a major part of that, and the Iraqis are moving forward with reconciliation, then I think you can argue that the surge is working and it should be continued. If, on the other hand, with 10 more months of a surge, which by then will have been in place for 2 years, you don't get reconciliation and political compromise going on, I think it would be tough to argue that we should just continue doing this indefinitely at very high cost.